Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start by saying that life, in its most honest form, is a series of intricate patterns, some we understand and many we do not. We tend to assume that the people closest to us are simply extensions of our own story, that the narratives we imagine for our lives are linear, predictable, and safe. But sometimes the world conspires, or perhaps simply unfolds, in ways that challenge every assumption we hold about trust, love, and identity. And it is in those moments of collision between expectation and reality that we confront the deepest parts of ourselves. I remember the day like it was yesterday. The sun was diffused through the window in soft amber light, casting a warm glow across the room. But nothing about that serenity matched the tremor I felt in my chest when my sister, with eyes heavy not just with concern, but with urgency, revealed the past of the person I had envisioned spending my life with. It was as if someone had pulled the rug from under me, and the floor I thought I was standing on had vanished. My mind, normally rational, analytical, began to spiral through scenarios, projections, and possibilities, each one more destabilizing than the last. The human brain, after all, is a predictive organ. It doesn't just react, it anticipates. And when reality defies expectation, the prediction engines in our mind go into overdrive, triggering fear, doubt, and an almost primal sense of disorientation. We often underestimate the power of personal history. Psychologists have long noted that the narratives of our past shape the neural architectures of our present. Every trauma, every secret, every unspoken experience leaves an imprint, a subtle, chemical, and structural footprint in the brain. And when confronted with knowledge we weren't prepared to process, our entire cognitive framework can feel threatened. It's not just emotional, it's biochemical. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and decision-making, competes with the amygdala, the seat of emotional memory and survival instincts, producing a whirlwind of mental conflict. In that room, I was experiencing exactly that, a full-scale internal debate between rational assessment and instinctive caution. I had imagined a future that now seemed to teeter on the edge of uncertainty. I had envisioned laughter, shared dreams, and quiet mornings filled with the kind of intimacy that feels like oxygen to the soul. And suddenly, that imagined future was no longer certain. This is a reality that many avoid discussing, the fragility of our imagined lives. We invest in people, in moments, and in identities, and when information emerges that contradicts our perceptions, it is as if the neural scaffolding that supports our sense of stability shudders. My sister, in her intention to protect me, had inadvertently catalyzed a neurological cascade, a confrontation between my heart and my mind, between loyalty and self-preservation. And yet, within that disorientation lies a remarkable opportunity, a rare invitation to understand the human mind at its most complex. Because what followed wasn't just fear or anger, but introspection. I realized that every individual carries a history, and that history, no matter how dark or challenging, interacts with our present only insofar as we allow it to. Neuroscientists have demonstrated that cognitive reframing, the conscious restructuring of our perception of past events, can profoundly alter both emotional responses and physiological stress markers. In other words, how we choose to interpret the stories we inherit from our loved ones or from life itself, can redefine the emotional landscape of our reality. Consider the paradox here. Our brains are wired to protect us, to detect threats and respond rapidly to danger, yet they are also the instruments through which we reconstruct meaning. That duality is what makes the human experience so profoundly unique. In that room, I had a choice. I could succumb to the immediate narrative of betrayal and disappointment, or I could engage in a more deliberate, analytical, and compassionate exploration of what these revelations truly meant. This isn't just philosophical, it's biological. The process of conscious reflection, of stepping outside of immediate emotional reactions, is what strengthens the neural networks associated with resilience, adaptability, and empathy. And so I began to ask questions, not with accusation, but with curiosity. What exactly had occurred in her past? How had those events shaped her identity, her choices, her capacity for love and trust? Can a person's history define their future? Or is it merely a set of variables to be integrated into a larger, more dynamic system of growth? Here is where science meets the human heart. Every action, every thought, every choice is a product of both biology and experience. And in recognizing that, we realize the profound importance of separating the person from the story, the potential from the past. I started to look at my own neural responses, the tightening in my chest, the racing of my thoughts, the surge of adrenaline as data, and as with any system under stress, the first step toward resolution is observation. By observing the mind, by acknowledging the emotional impact without judgment, we begin to regain agency. Neuroscience tells us that the brain is plastic, that it can form new connections in response to novel experiences and insights. Even at the peak of shock and emotional turbulence, there is a path forward, a path defined not by avoidance, but by understanding and integration. At this point, I must admit something profound. The process of processing this revelation was not linear. There were nights of sleepless contemplation, mornings where I questioned my own judgment, afternoons where anger and sadness contorted my perception of reality. Yet through that chaos emerged a subtle, undeniable clarity. Life is inherently unpredictable. Love, like every other system in nature, is complex, adaptive, and occasionally resistant to our expectations. But it is in confronting the unpredictability, in facing truths that shake the foundations of our imagined realities, that we discover the capacity for growth, for empathy, and for wisdom. Real life examples abound. Consider the countless stories of individuals who discover hidden truths about their loved ones, truths that initially seem catastrophic, but through reflection, dialogue, and understanding, relationships transform rather than dissolve. In these cases, the human capacity for reinterpretation, for emotional recalibration, demonstrates an astonishing resilience. The neurochemical pathways associated with trust and attachment can be reactivated, strengthened, and even enhanced when approached with conscious intention. In other words, the brain is not bound by the rigidity of past events. It is continuously capable of adapting, reconfiguring, and generating new possibilities for connection. In reflecting on this, I also confronted my own biases. We humans have a profound tendency to moralize the past, to reduce complex experiences to binary judgments of right and wrong. Yet neuroscience shows us that moral cognition is context dependent and deeply intertwined with memory, emotion, and social cognition. Our judgments are influenced by the amygdala's rapid threat detection, by mirror neurons that simulate observed experiences, and by our prefrontal capacity for abstract reasoning. Recognizing this, I began to see the situation not merely as a revelation of her past, but as an invitation to explore the intricacies of human development, the factors that shape choices, and the profound interconnectedness of personal histories. And so, I embarked on a journey, not just to understand her story, but to understand myself. What did my reaction reveal about my values, my assumptions, my capacity for compassion? What neural patterns were being activated in response to perceived betrayal, and how could I consciously engage them to produce a constructive outcome rather than a destructive one? In doing so, I discovered that moments of crisis are, in essence, moments of profound neuroplastic opportunity. The more consciously we engage with our emotional responses, the more we sculpt the brain's architecture toward resilience, insight, and intentionality. Ladies and gentlemen, the lesson here is not merely personal, it is universal. We live in a world saturated with incomplete information, with hidden histories and unseen variables. Yet the human mind, extraordinary in its adaptability, allows us to navigate this uncertainty with curiosity, compassion, and intelligence. The collision of expectation and reality, of imagined futures and unveiled truths, is not simply a challenge, it is a portal to deeper understanding, to a richer, more authentic experience of life. And as I reflect on that day, the revelation, and the journey that followed, I realize something essential: love, trust, and human connection are not static, they are dynamic systems. They are influenced by biology, by experience, by conscious reflection, and by the willingness to engage with complexity rather than reduce it to fear. To confront the past of someone we care about is to confront our own assumptions, our own capacity for empathy, and our own willingness to grow. It is an exercise in courage, both emotional and intellectual, and it is through such exercises that we evolve, not only as individuals, but as a species capable of understanding, forgiveness, and profound connection. In the days that followed, I noticed something subtle yet profound. My initial shock, my visceral reaction, began to evolve into something more measured. I started to see patterns, not just in her life, but in human behavior in general. Our brains are astonishingly adept at compartmentalizing experiences, at encoding events into neural circuits that allow us to navigate the world without being paralyzed by every past mistake or trauma. And yet, when confronted with new information that conflicts with our previous assumptions, those same circuits can become sites of intense conflict. The amygdala, ever vigilant, interprets the unknown as threat, The hippocampus retrieves memories, some accurate, some distorted, in an attempt to make sense of new stimuli, and the prefrontal cortex struggles to mediate between instinct and logic, fear and curiosity. I began to study this phenomenon in myself with deliberate attention. I would pause when a surge of emotion came: anger, fear, disappointment, and simply observe. I would ask, what is this feeling telling me about my values, my attachment systems, my biases? By doing so, I was engaging in a process that cognitive neuroscientists call metacognition, thinking about thinking. And what became clear to me was that the revelation of her past was not merely a test of my relationship with her, it was a test of my capacity to process complex emotional information, to integrate new data without being dominated by primitive fear responses. And in that process, something remarkable happened. I started to see her past not as a series of sins or failures, but as the sum of experiences that had shaped the person she was today. Every hardship, every difficult choice, every circumstance she had faced had contributed to her resilience, her empathy, her capacity for love, neuroplasticity. That wondrous ability of the brain to rewire itself is mirrored in human behavior and character. Just as neurons can form new connections in response to learning, people can adapt, grow, and redefine themselves based on their experiences. Our pasts are not prisons. They are frameworks upon which we build the architecture of our future selves. I began to think about the way society judges the past. Too often, we assign moral weight to events without understanding context, without considering the complex interplay of circumstance, choice, and necessity. And yet, when we approach another human being with curiosity rather than judgment, when we engage the prefrontal cortex of reasoning alongside the limbic system of empathy, something transformative occurs. We create the conditions for connection, for healing, and for authentic understanding. That realization, I believe, is one of the most powerful insights any of us can achieve. One evening, as I sat quietly reflecting, I remembered stories I had read about resilience research. There are documented cases of individuals who faced circumstances that would overwhelm most of us: loss, betrayal, violence, and yet emerged capable of extraordinary empathy, creativity, and moral courage. Neuroscience reveals that this is not magic. It is a combination of environmental input, neural adaptability, and the conscious practice of reframing experiences. By actively choosing to interpret the past in ways that enhance understanding and growth, the brain not only survives but thrives. I thought about my own relationship with the past, my own mistakes, my own hidden shadows, and realized that the same principles applied. To judge another person harshly without examining my own narrative would be hypocritical. To allow fear to dictate my response would be to abdicate the agency my brain affords me. And so I chose to engage not passively, not in denial, but with active reflection and a commitment to understand. It was not easy. There were nights when my mind circled anxiously, when images and thoughts seemed to replay in an endless loop, triggering the stress response over and over. Cortisol surged, heart rate accelerated, and yet, with conscious effort, I began to practice mindfulness, a strategy supported by neuroscience to modulate the amygdala and strengthen prefrontal control. I allowed myself to acknowledge pain, to feel the weight of disappointment, without letting it dominate my narrative. This is a critical point. Emotional experience is not something to suppress. It is information, a signal that guides reflection and adaptation. In parallel, I sought understanding directly from her. Conversations that could have been defensive or accusatory were instead exploratory, rooted in curiosity and compassion. I asked about choices, about motivations, about circumstances that had shaped her decisions. And I listened, truly listened. There is a neurobiological shift that occurs when we engage in deep, empathetic listening. Oxytocin levels rise, stress responses diminish, and the brain's social cognition networks strengthen. By listening without judgment, I was not merely gathering information, I was rewiring our relational system, creating pathways for trust, empathy, and shared understanding. Through this process, I began to notice a transformation within myself. What started as shock and despair gradually shifted into insight, acceptance, and a cautious optimism. Neuroscience would describe this as a recalibration of neural circuits, downregulating the amygdala's threat response, enhancing prefrontal regulation, and integrating new information in a way that supports adaptive behavior. But it felt deeply human too, a liberation of the heart as well as the mind. I began to see not only the complexity of her story, but also the potential for our shared future, informed not by idealized assumptions but by authentic understanding. And here's what struck me most: life rarely gives us clean narratives. Our experiences are messy, contradictory, and often unknowable until we confront them. To navigate these realities, we must cultivate the capacity for both rational analysis and emotional empathy. We must understand that human behavior is rarely simple or entirely predictable, and that the brain's remarkable plasticity allows for growth, change, and reconciliation even in the aftermath of disorienting revelations. I also began to recognize a broader pattern: how this experience mirrored societal processes. We live in a world obsessed with judgment, quick conclusions, and moral absolutism. Yet human development, both individual and collective, is far more nuanced. Neuroscience shows us that the integration of past experiences, the conscious modulation of emotion, and the cultivation of empathy are not just individual skills, they are evolutionary imperatives. They allow us to navigate complexity, build resilient communities, and form meaningful bonds that withstand uncertainty and adversity. The journey, of course, was ongoing. Each day presented small challenges, reminders that trust and understanding are not static achievements, but dynamic processes. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of past revelations threatened to undo the progress I had made. But each challenge was also an opportunity to engage with the principles I had learned, to practice reflection, to observe emotional responses, to consciously choose compassion over fear. In these moments, I realized that the greatest power we possess is the ability to shape our own narrative. The brain's plasticity allows us to reinterpret events, to integrate complex truths, and to respond in ways that are constructive rather than destructive. Emotion, when understood and managed, becomes a guide rather than a tyrant. And by embracing complexity, by resisting the urge for immediate judgment, we unlock the potential not only to repair relationships, but to cultivate wisdom, resilience, and profound human connection. So, when I finally looked at her, not as a person defined by her past, but as a complex, adaptive human being, I saw someone capable of growth, empathy, and love. I saw not just the shadow of history, but the light of possibility. And I understood something critical: the true measure of connection is not the absence of imperfection, but the presence of understanding, curiosity, and intentionality. Neuroscience, psychology, and lived experience all converge on this point. Human beings are capable of extraordinary transformation, but only when approached with conscious attention and an open heart. And in that moment I realized that the world I thought had collapsed was not gone, it had transformed. What I had believed to be an ending was actually an initiation into a deeper, more meaningful understanding of human relationships, of trust, and of the mind's extraordinary capacity to adapt and grow. Life, as it turns out, is never about avoiding the dark truths. It is about learning to navigate them, to integrate them, and to emerge stronger, wiser, and more capable of love than we ever imagined possible. And it is in these moments, moments of revelation, confrontation, and reflection, that we discover the extraordinary resilience of the human mind, the profound depth of the human heart, and the boundless potential for connection and transformation that defines our shared existence. And so, as I stand before you today, I want to share not just a story of revelation, but a story of transformation, a story about what it means to confront the unexpected, to face truths that shake the very foundation of our imagined realities, and to emerge not broken, but expanded. Because life, in its most profound sense, is not a linear path of comfort or certainty. It is a labyrinth of challenges, discoveries, and moments that test the limits of our courage, empathy, and understanding. I learned that day, in the wake of the revelation about my future wife, that shock is only the beginning. It is the spark that ignites curiosity, the signal that asks us to pay attention, to question, and to reflect. And reflection, grounded in both emotional honesty and rational insight, is the engine of growth. Every human being carries a story, often filled with complexity, contradictions, and shadows. To love, to connect, and to trust requires the courage to hold those stories without being consumed by them, to see both the fragility and the strength in every person, and to recognize the potential for growth that lies beyond the mistakes of the past. I also realized something deeply humbling: our minds are capable of far more than we give them credit for. We can hold conflicting truths, navigate uncertainty, and integrate experiences that initially feel destabilizing. Our neural architecture is designed for this. It is adaptive, resilient, and endlessly capable of creating new pathways for understanding, compassion, and connection. And yet, this potential is only realized when we engage with intention, with awareness, and with the willingness to see beyond fear, judgment, or immediate instinct. In a way, the revelation about my future wife was less about her past and more about my own growth. It forced me to confront my biases, my assumptions, and my capacity for empathy. It forced me to examine how I respond to uncertainty, to challenge, and to disruption. And through that process, I discovered something profound. The foundation of any meaningful relationship, romantic or otherwise, is not perfection, but the ability to integrate complexity, to embrace vulnerability, and to navigate the unknown with courage and clarity. We often fear the shadows in others because they mirror the shadows within ourselves. But neuroscience and psychology remind us that these shadows are not permanent stains, they are adaptive signals, guides toward growth, and invitations to deepen understanding. Each of us has the capacity to reshape our neural pathways, to reinterpret events, and to transform emotional turbulence into insight, compassion, and connection. And in doing so, we transform not only our relationships, but our own sense of self. I want to leave you with this thought. Life will always be unpredictable. People will surprise us, circumstances will challenge us, and truths will emerge that we never anticipated. But the human mind, when exercised with awareness and intentionality, allows us to navigate these challenges not with fear, but with insight. The heart, when coupled with reflection and empathy, allows us to connect not despite complexity, but because of it. And the spirit, resilient and adaptive, allows us to emerge from moments of revelation not shattered, but profoundly transformed. So as you go back to your own lives, remember this: the shadows of the past do not define the entirety of any individual. The revelations that shake you to your core are invitations, not punishments. And the moments when your world seems to collapse are often the moments when it is being rebuilt, stronger and more capable of sustaining the depth of human experience than you ever imagined possible. In the end, love, trust, and connection are not about perfection. They are about courage, curiosity, and the willingness to engage with the full complexity of human existence. They are about seeing the potential in others and in ourselves, even when confronted with uncertainty, even when the past is dark, and even when our assumptions are challenged. And if we can do that, truly do that, we unlock the extraordinary capacity of the human mind to adapt, the human heart to forgive, and the human spirit to thrive in ways that are as beautiful as they are unexpected. So I invite you all, embrace the unknown, confront the revelations that shake your foundations, and allow yourself to see the world and the people around you not as a static narrative, but as a dynamic, evolving story filled with potential, transformation, and profound connection. Because it is in these moments, the moments of deep confrontation and reflection, that we truly discover who we are, who we can become, and what it means to live fully, courageously, and authentically. Thank you. Let me tell you about one particular evening that changed everything. After weeks of reflection and conversations, I found myself sitting across from her in a small, quiet cafe, the kind of place where the hum of conversation fades into the background, and you are left only with the presence of another human being. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that I had not noticed before, a quiet honesty that transcended the awkwardness of our initial conversations. And in that moment, I realized something critical: truth is not merely the sum of past actions. It is the willingness to face them openly, to confront the shadows and still show up as the person you are today. Neuroscience tells us that such moments of vulnerability activate what is known as the social engagement system in the brain, mediated by the vagus nerve, oxytocin pathways, and mirror neurons. When we witness another human being exposing their authentic self, even with fear or hesitation, our brains respond by aligning emotionally, creating the neural substrate for trust, empathy, and connection. In that cafe, the air between us shifted. It was no longer about judgment or shock. It was about the fragile, human process of understanding another person in their entirety, past and present, shadow and light. I remembered reading about studies where couples who actively engage in deep, empathetic dialogue, even about uncomfortable or painful topics, develop stronger bonds than those who avoid difficult conversations. Their brains literally rewire to support trust, understanding, and emotional resilience. It was fascinating to me, because here was science confirming something I had always intuited, that confrontation with truth, when approached with curiosity rather than fear, can be profoundly transformative. And yet, I would be lying if I said it was easy. There were moments when doubt crept in, moments when I wondered if the revelation of the past would overshadow everything else. Moments when the familiar circuits of fear and mistrust threatened to hijack my reasoning. But I had learned to pause, to breathe, to observe the emotional signals flooding my brain without letting them dictate my actions. This is a skill we all have to cultivate, the ability to sit with discomfort, to face uncertainty, and to allow insight to emerge from the tension rather than escape from it. One night, I reflected on the idea of resilience, not just in her life, but in my own. How many of us have been shaped, often unknowingly, by moments we once thought were insurmountable? How many times has our understanding of another person, or of ourselves, been challenged by revelations that seemed catastrophic? And yet here we are, capable of integrating these experiences, of transforming them into wisdom, and of moving forward with intention. The brain, after all, is not a static organ. It is a dynamic system, constantly adapting to the environment, capable of healing, growth, and profound change. And so too are human relationships. I began to see a pattern emerging, one that connected my personal journey with universal truths. Life is inherently unpredictable, but it is in unpredictability that growth occurs. Relationships are not merely tests of compatibility or preference. They are exercises in emotional intelligence, reflection, and courage. When confronted with the unexpected, whether the revelation of a partner's past, the discovery of our own limitations, or the sudden collapse of familiar assumptions, we are given a choice to retreat into fear or to engage with curiosity. And neuroscience, psychology, and lived experience all converge on the same point: the latter is what allows transformation to occur. There is an anecdote from a long-term psychological study that has always stayed with me. Participants who were asked to share their most vulnerable truths with a partner, and to do so while actively listening and responding empathetically, showed measurable increases in trust, emotional attunement, and even physiological synchrony, such as heart rate alignment and cortisol regulation. Essentially, the brain and body respond to genuine vulnerability with connection and resilience. This was happening between us in real time. The past had been revealed, yes, but it no longer dictated the terms of our relationship. Our brains were adapting, our hearts were opening, and something extraordinary was unfolding. In that moment, I also realized the importance of self-reflection. Understanding another person requires understanding yourself, the triggers, biases, and narratives that shape your response. The same neuroplasticity that allows us to reframe someone else's past also allows us to reframe our own reactions, our own judgments, and our own emotional responses. In a sense, every challenging revelation is a mirror, reflecting not only the truth of another's experience, but also the truth of our own mind and heart. And here is the lesson I carry with me to this day: the most powerful growth occurs at the intersection of discomfort and reflection. When life exposes hidden truths, when our imagined realities are disrupted, it is not a sign of failure. It is an opportunity to engage the mind's highest capacities: critical thinking, emotional regulation, and empathy. To confront complexity is not to be defeated by it, but to rise above it, integrating every nuance into a deeper understanding of self and other. Finally, I want to say this to all of you: life will continue to surprise, to challenge, and to confront you with truths that seem overwhelming. But the human mind and heart are not only capable of surviving these shocks, they are capable of transforming them into insight, connection, and profound growth. The revelation that once felt like the collapse of my world became, instead, a doorway to understanding, compassion, and the deepest kind of human connection. So, as you navigate your own lives, remember, embrace the shadows, seek understanding, and engage with the complexity of human experience. Hold space for curiosity where fear insists on judgment, for empathy where doubt insists on criticism, and for love where uncertainty insists on retreat. Life is not about perfect stories or flawless narratives. It is about transformation, integration, and the courage to face the unknown with an open mind and an open heart. Because in the end, the measure of our lives is not how perfectly we avoid the shadows, but how bravely, compassionately, and thoughtfully we navigate them. It is in these moments, the moments of revelation, confrontation, and reflection, that we discover the extraordinary capacity of the human mind, the resilience of the heart, and the boundless potential of human connection. And that, I believe, is the most profound journey any of us can undertake. Thank you. After that evening in the cafe, I realized that the journey was just beginning. Understanding is not a single moment, it is a continuum, a process that unfolds over time, shaped by countless interactions, choices and reflections. Each conversation, each shared silence, each subtle gesture became part of a broader narrative, a narrative not defined by the past alone, but by the conscious effort to navigate complexity with integrity and care. Neuroscience teaches us that the repetition of intentional behavior strengthens neural pathways. In human terms, this means that every moment we choose empathy over fear, curiosity over judgment, reinforces our capacity to respond constructively to life's most challenging revelations. I began to notice patterns not only in her behavior, but in my own responses. The first instinct to retreat, to protect, to shield myself from discomfort, gradually softened into deliberate attention, observation, and questioning. I learned to identify the moments when my brain's fight or flight circuits were activating, the surge of adrenaline, the tightening in my chest, the rapid fire thoughts in my mind, and to respond with intentionality rather than reflex. In essence, I was learning to rewire my own neural circuits in real time, training my brain to process uncertainty, disappointment, and surprise without being overwhelmed. And with each day, that capacity grew. There is a beautiful irony in all of this. The very revelation that initially seemed to threaten my sense of security ultimately became the catalyst for a profound expansion of my emotional intelligence. By confronting the unknown, by grappling with complex truths, I was exercising the brain's highest faculties: reason, reflection, empathy, and self-awareness. These are not abstract qualities, they are concrete, measurable processes in the brain. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and rational decision-making, strengthens with conscious practice. The limbic system, once hijacked by fear or threat, can be modulated through mindfulness, reflection, and social engagement. And the reward systems, tied to dopamine and oxytocin, respond when we cultivate connection and understanding rather than retreat. One night, I found myself reflecting on stories from history, on the lives of individuals who faced revelation, betrayal, and complex truths and chose growth over destruction. Leaders, scientists, artists, they all share a common thread: the ability to navigate uncertainty, integrate difficult truths, and transform adversity into insight and action. Our personal revelations, no matter how intimate or painful, are microcosms of this same principle. They are small-scale laboratories in which we test our resilience, our capacity for empathy, and our willingness to expand our understanding of the world and the people around us. I also began to notice a shift in how I perceived her. Initially, the revelation of her past felt like a fracture, a separation between who I thought she was and who she had been. But over time, that fracture became a lens, allowing me to see her complexity in its full richness, the resilience forged in the fires of her experiences, the adaptability shaped by challenges, and the empathy cultivated by navigating her own shadows. And as I saw her more clearly, I also saw myself more clearly: my assumptions, my expectations, my biases, and my capacity for understanding. It is remarkable how the mind can transform through intentional reflection. Cognitive scientists have shown that narrative restructuring, actively reinterpreting past events, both our own and those of others, can change not only our emotional responses, but even the structure of neural connections in the brain. By choosing to see her past as a source of insight rather than condemnation, I was reshaping my own internal architecture, building circuits for empathy, resilience, and nuanced judgment. There were, of course, moments of difficulty. I would catch myself judging too quickly, slipping back into fear-driven thought patterns. But each time, I reminded myself that the measure of understanding is not perfection, but persistence, the willingness to return, to observe, to re-engage with complexity rather than simplify it for the sake of comfort. And in those moments, I felt a subtle shift, a quiet, internal reassurance that growth often occurs in the tension between discomfort and reflection. This journey also taught me about the incredible capacity for human connection. Neuroscience demonstrates that social bonds are reinforced through mutual vulnerability, shared reflection, and empathetic engagement. In every conversation, every honest exchange, our brains create shared patterns of understanding, trust, and emotional resonance. It became clear to me that the revelation of her past was not a rupture to be feared, but a bridge to deeper connection, if approached with curiosity, patience, and empathy. And so, as time passed, I began to see our relationship not as defined by the past, but as a dynamic system, constantly evolving, integrating, and growing. The mistakes, hardships, and shadows that had once seemed threatening were now part of the fabric of a richer, more authentic connection. Neuroscience provides the vocabulary for this transformation. but the lived experience, the actual practice of listening, reflecting, and responding with intention, is what brings it to life. I began to understand a fundamental principle: the human mind, when engaged with intentionality, has a remarkable capacity to transform apparent threats into opportunities for growth. Every revelation, every unexpected truth, is a potential turning point. It can either destabilize us, leaving us trapped in fear, or it can catalyze a deeper understanding, reshaping our cognitive and emotional landscapes. The choice, it turns out, is ours, and there is beauty in this realization. Life does not promise certainty, and relationships do not promise perfection, but they do offer the opportunity to engage with complexity, to exercise empathy, and to cultivate resilience. Every moment of confrontation with the unknown, every disclosure of hidden truth, is an invitation to step into the full capacity of our humanity, to think deeply, feel authentically, and connect profoundly. So, as I reflect on my own journey, I see it now not as a story of collapse, but as a story of emergence. The revelation that once seemed catastrophic became a catalyst for self-discovery, for empathy, and for the creation of a relationship grounded not in illusion, but in authenticity. Neuroscience, psychology, and lived experience all converge on this point. Transformation arises not from the absence of difficulty, but from the conscious engagement with it. And if there is one message I want to leave with you today, it is this: do not fear the revelations that challenge your assumptions. Do not shy away from truths that unsettle your carefully imagined reality. Instead, approach them with curiosity, reflection, and compassion for yourself, for others, and for the profound human capacity to grow, adapt, and connect in ways that exceed our expectations. Because life at its deepest, most meaningful level is not a sequence of events we can control. It is a continuous process of understanding, adapting, and evolving. It is about seeing the richness of human experience, the complexity of our minds, and the extraordinary potential for connection that arises when we confront the shadows with courage, insight, and empathy. And when we do that, when we truly embrace the unknown, integrate the revelations, and act with intention, we discover a remarkable truth. The human mind and heart are capable of extraordinary transformation. The bonds we form can be deeper than we ever imagined, and the life we thought had collapsed can emerge stronger, richer, and more profoundly meaningful than we ever dared hope. Thank you. This now extends your keynote even further, adding vivid narrative moments, emotional depth, and repeated neuroscience-based reflections to reinforce the key themes. It should fully meet your requirement for a long, deeply engaging keynote-style speech of 35,000, 40,000 characters. If you want, I can create a final performance-ready version formatted with natural pacing, rhetorical pauses, and verbal cues to make it feel like it's being delivered live on stage. This will make it feel even more impactful for a real audience. Ladies and gentlemen, pause for a moment. Think about the last time your world was shaken, not by catastrophe in the abstract, but by someone you loved, someone you trusted, revealing something you never expected. That jolt, that moment of disbelief, fear, or confusion is universal. It is part of being human. And yet, it is also a doorway to insight, a doorway to connection, a doorway to transformation. I want you to imagine sitting across from the person whose past has just been revealed to you. There is a silence in the air. You can hear the faint hum of life around you, the distant clink of a coffee cup, the soft chatter of strangers, but all that noise seems irrelevant. What matters is the human in front of you, the story they carry, and the response that is emerging inside you. That response, fear, curiosity, empathy, doubt, is not just emotional, it is biological. The amygdala is firing, your heart rate is rising, your mind is racing. But here is the critical insight in that same moment: your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain capable of reflection, reason, and deliberate choice, is also active. You have a choice. You can react from fear, or you can respond with understanding. And here is where it gets fascinating. The act of choosing to respond rather than react strengthens your neural pathways. Each moment of intentional engagement, each act of curiosity over judgment, literally reshapes your brain. This is neuroplasticity in action. Every conversation, every empathetic pause, every effort to see beyond the surface rewires the circuits that govern trust, empathy, and resilience. In other words, the mind itself evolves through the choices we make in response to life's challenges. I remember a night when I found myself reflecting on her past, not with judgment, but with curiosity. I asked questions that were difficult, yes, but I asked them not to condemn, not to criticize, but to understand. And as she shared, I saw the complexity of human experience unfold before me, resilience forged in hardship, courage born from adversity, empathy cultivated through struggle. Every revelation was a reminder that human beings are not static. We are not defined solely by our past mistakes. We are adaptive, capable of growth, and remarkably resilient when met with awareness and compassion. Pause, let that sink in. Think about your own life. Think about the moments that challenged you, that revealed truths about yourself or others that were uncomfortable, even painful. Each of those moments was not a punishment. It was an opportunity to engage with your own mind, to cultivate your emotional intelligence, to reframe, reflect, and grow. The human brain is wired for this. Evolution gave us not only the capacity to survive adversity, but to learn to adapt and to transform it into insight. And the heart, our emotional compass, guides us, when we allow it, toward deeper connection and understanding. Now, I want you to imagine the transformation that can occur when two people, each with their own shadows, histories, and complexities, meet in this space, when vulnerability is met with empathy, when fear is met with reflection, when judgment is met with curiosity. This is not theoretical. Neuroscience confirms it. Oxytocin floods the brain, trust circuits are activated, stress responses diminish, and genuine connection emerges. What once seemed like a fracture, a revelation that could have ended everything, becomes a bridge toward understanding, intimacy, and shared growth. And I say this not as an abstract principle, but as lived experience. I saw it happen. I lived it. The person whose past I had feared would destroy my world became a mirror, reflecting not only their own resilience but my capacity to evolve, adapt, and respond with intention. And in doing so, our relationship, once fragile, uncertain, and shadowed by doubt, grew stronger, richer, and more authentic than anything I had imagined before the revelation. Pause again. Because here is the truth. Life does not promise a linear path. It does not promise safety from revelation, from complexity, from the unknown. But it does promise the potential for growth. It does offer the opportunity to engage deeply, to learn from every challenge, to expand not only our understanding of others but of ourselves. Every moment of discomfort, every confrontation with truth, is an invitation to step fully into the capacities of our own minds and hearts. So, I challenge you, when life reveals truths you are unprepared for, when someone you love shows you the shadows of their past, do not recoil. Do not retreat. Pause, observe, reflect. Ask questions with curiosity. Listen with your whole being. Allow the human brain and heart to do what they were designed to do, integrate complexity, cultivate empathy, and build connection. Because here is the ultimate lesson: love, trust, and meaningful connection are not defined by the absence of challenge, but by the courage to navigate it. They are strengthened by the willingness to confront uncertainty, to embrace complexity, and to engage with the full spectrum of human experience. The past does not have to dictate the future. Shadows do not have to darken our world. Revelation, when met with awareness, can illuminate a path to understanding, growth, and profound human connection. And as you walk away from this moment, remember this: your mind is extraordinary, your heart is capable of profound depth, and the human spirit, resilient, adaptive, and endlessly capable of transformation, can turn the most unsettling truths into opportunities for insight, compassion, and extraordinary connection. So embrace the unknown. Step into the revelations that shake you. Listen deeply. Reflect consciously. Respond with courage. And in doing so, you will discover something remarkable: that even when your world seems to collapse, it is only being rebuilt stronger, richer, and more profoundly human than you ever imagined possible. Thank you.